When I was a kid and a new movie would be coming out, I would always be excited to see the tie-in products released with it. Novelizations, comic book adaptations, video games based on the movies, toys, cereal, you name it. At the time, it would almost seem like the movie wasn't the main event, but almost just an opening act for all of the merchandise. It makes you stop and wonder, are the movies even really necessary? In 1996, Lucasfilms, the makers of Star Wars, set out to answer that very question by putting out everything that goes along with a new movie release, except the movie. This is the story of Shadows of the Empire. Star Wars had changed cinema back in the 70s and early 80s, and though it had remained popular through home video releases, new books, toys, and comics, by the 90s it was nowhere near as popular as it had used to be. So the people behind Star Wars wanted to find new ways to get it into the front of people's minds. The origins of Shadows of the Empire all started at a dinner between Lou Aronica, who worked at Bantam Spectra, the company that had the book publishing rights for Star Wars at the time, and Lucy Untry Williams of Lucas Books. During the meal, Aronica suggested that because Lucasfilm had a number of licensing deals, it wouldn't be that difficult for them to create a multimedia release, a so-called movie project without the movie. Lucasfilm decided not to make a sequel or a prequel, but what they called an interquel, a story that would take place between two of the movies they had already released. Originally, the plan was to set the story between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, but eventually it was decided that there was better story potential fleshing out the events between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. After getting the idea approved by George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, Lucy Untry Wilson and Howard Rothman wrote out a basic outline for the story before hiring Steve Perry to write the novel, which would serve as the backbone for the entire release. With a more complete outline by Perry, Lucasfilms and its business partners set out to tell a new story in a number of different mediums. Shadows of the Empire was written by Steve Perry and published in May of 1996 by Bantam Books. The story of the novel picks up right after the events of The Empire Strikes Back. Han Solo has been frozen in carbonite and taken by the bounty hunter Boba Fett to be delivered to the crime lord Jabba the Hutt. With the help of Luke Skywalker, who had just narrowly survived a duel with Darth Vader, Leia makes plans to rescue Han. And though they fail in their initial attempt, they continue their search for him. On the other side of the galaxy, Darth Vader is on his own mission, to find Luke so that the Emperor can turn him to the dark side. All the while having to deal with the leader of the Black Sun crime syndicate, Prince Xizor, who was transporting the plans of the second Death Star for the Empire. When Xizor learns that Luke Skywalker is Darth Vader's son, he makes plans to kill him, to discredit the Sith Lord so that he can take Darth Vader's place as the Emperor's second-in-command. Eventually, Xizor kidnaps Leia to try and lure Luke into a trap, so our heroes set out to rescue her, with events leading to a three-way space battle over the Imperial capital planet, Coruscant, between the Rebels, the Empire, and Xizor's forces. The story also answers some questions viewers of Return of the Jedi might have had, like where did Luke get his new lightsaber? And why does everyone trust Lando now? Didn't he try to kill them earlier? Bantam Books also published a junior novelization of the book by Christopher Golden in October of 1996. The next piece of media released for Shadows of the Empire was a soundtrack released on April 23, 1996, featuring new music based on the book composed by Joel McNeely, a composer who had worked with Lucasfilm in the past on a film called Radioland Murders. After this project, he would continue working in the film industry, doing a lot of straight-to-DVD Disney projects, including The Jungle Book 2, Mulan, Lilo and Stitch 2, and the Tinkerbell series. He even wrote the scores for the movie Holes and The Avengers. No, not that Avengers. This Avengers.
You all know who I am.
The album was recorded by the 90-piece Royal Scottish National Orchestra and was joined by a 150-voice chorus. And though it was mainly made up of new music, Joel McNeely didn't want it to come across as a pale imitation of other Star Wars music. So he sampled some familiar tracks from the series, such as the Star Wars theme, the Imperial March, and the Force theme. The album was well received by critics, though some did note that they wished John Williams' music would have been featured more. The CD also had CD-ROM features that would allow you to watch behind-the-scenes content if the disc was put into a computer. A trend at the time that has now died out, since no one buys CDs. Next to come was the comic book, which would run as a 6-issue series released by Dark Horse Comics from May to October of 1996. The comics basically told the same story that was found in the book, but did elaborate on a few characters that the novel did not focus on. Most notably, Boba Fett's journey to Jabba the Hutt played a big part in the comic book. He fights with his fellow bounty hunters to try to be the one to deliver the frozen hero to the crime lord. A few of the villains put up a good fight, but in the end, Boba Fett remains the victor. The comic also takes time to focus on a new character named Jix, who serves as a special agent working for Darth Vader, who has been tasked with making sure that Shizor's men aren't able to kill Luke so that Vader might be able to sway him to the dark side. The summer of 1996 saw the release of a toy line for Shadows of the Empire, produced by Hasbro using the Kenner name. The figures were similar to the Power of the Force series that had been in circulation since 1995, but instead of featuring a red lightsaber on the packaging, a purple one was used. The line featured figures for fan favorites like Luke Skywalker, Chewbacca, and Princess Leia, all in disguises that were used during the story. 2 new characters were also given figures: the new villain Prince Shizor, and a new smuggler character Dash Rendar, who was essentially the Han Solo replacement for the story. Hasbro also sold Dash Rendar's ship, the Outrider, and though they had planned to create Shizor's ship, the Virago, as well, it was never produced. Action figures weren't the only thing for collectors to get their hands on for the series, as Topps put out a set of 100 cards in September of 1996 to coincide with the other media released for Shadows of the Empire. The cards featured original art by Greg and Tim Hildebrandt, twin artists who have created some of the most iconic art in Star Wars history. Cards 1 through 72 followed the plot of Shadows of the Empire, depicting moments described from the book, with cards 73 to 82 focusing on individual characters, cards 83 to 88 looking at vehicles from the story, cards 89 to 94 had art inspired by the Dark Horse comic series, and cards 95 to 100 drew their inspiration from the at the time yet to be released video game. The Shadows of the Empire video game was released for the Nintendo 64 on December 3, 1996, having been in development since late 1994. With the N64 being released only 2 months earlier, the game became one of the first must-have games for the system. Designing a game on new hardware is always a lot of work, but the designers of Shadows of the Empire were also under a strict deadline, as the game had to be out by Christmas of 1996. The game was such a priority that even Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, stopped in to check on the game's progress and offer some ideas. Shadows of the Empire would come to PC almost a year later when it was released on September 17, 1997 for Microsoft Windows. This version of the game would feature improved graphics as well as fully voiced cutscenes instead of the still images and text found on the Nintendo 64. The gameplay was mostly made up of third-person shooting segments, with a few vehicle sections featured throughout. Reviews at the time were mixed, with some criticizing the shooting sections, which was a majority of the game, but others praising the vehicle combat, specifically the section that let you play out the iconic Battle of Hoth. Nevertheless, the game would become the most financially successful piece of the Shadows of the Empire release, selling over 1 million copies. Again, like the comic, the story is the same as the book, but focuses on a minor character and gives their perspective more attention. The game has you take control of Dash Rendar, a smuggler and old friend of Han Solo who is transporting supplies before the Battle of Hoth. Dash finds himself mixed up in the rebels' fight and ends up helping them escape from the Empire. From there, you help search for Han Solo by fighting bounty hunters IG-88 and Boba Fett. You protect Luke Skywalker from a gang of hitmen, help steal the second Death Star plans, and fly in the final space battle above Coruscant, which leads to Dash Rendar's perceived death. Personally, this is how I experienced the story of Shadows of the Empire, so it was weird for me to learn that in the big picture of things, Dash Rendar is really only a side character. Overall, Shadows of the Empire was considered a success and was given a sequel in the form of a comic book called Shadows of the Empire Evolution, which took place after the events of Return of the Jedi. It was written by Steve Perry, the author of the original novel, and consisted of 5 issues that were released monthly from February 1998 to June 1998. With the re-release of the original trilogy special editions just 1 year later in 1997, and Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace released to theaters in 1999, Star Wars was back in full swing. and will probably continue to remain that way forever, since now Disney owns Star Wars and they will never let it fade from people's memory ever again. And while it didn't make the impact of the prequel or sequel trilogies when it came to making new fans, Shadows of the Empire serves as an interesting footnote in the history of Star Wars, and it proved the importance of the things that come out around a movie, solidifying the fact that the toys, video games, and books may be just as important as the movie itself when it comes to keeping your fans focused on your franchise. Thank you so much for watching this week's video. Please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for new videos every week. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next week with another list to close out Blockbuster Month.